Perfect. So we will go ahead and get started. Today is Monday, November 8th, 2021. I'm calling the meeting of the Safe and Healthy Schools Commission to order. It is 2 o'clock, and the meeting is a combined fashion. We have some of our commissioners on Teams and some of them here in person. So with that, I'm going to send it over to you, Diana, to do a roll call, please.
Darren Glam, Ivy Batmill,
Here.
Scott Benton,
Here.
Lorraine Benuto,
Here.
Charlene Bybee, Elizabeth Flores,
Present.
Jessica Goycocha,
Present.
Amber Joyner,
I'm here on Teams, thanks.
Leanne McCauley Larson,
Here on Teams.
Peg Samples, Natalie Sanchez, Misty Vaughn Allen.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, we do have a quorum, and I would like to apologize on behalf of two of our members, both Peg Samples and Misty Von Allen sent their regards. They are not able to make it today. And I think Councilwoman Bybee as well. This has a conflict for her, so we knew that she was not going to be here either. Moving on, we're going to move on to item 2, which is items for presentation, discussion, and information and/or action. Public comment. Any individual may address the Safe and Healthy Schools Commission concerning any action item listed below. A completed citizen's request to speak card should be filled out and submitted before speaking during the public comment section, which must at least include a name of the speaker and will take place prior to any action. Our first item under item 2 is approval of our minutes, item 2.01 for our meeting on October 11th.
I, Jessica Goguchia, move to approve the minutes from October 11th, 2021 as presented.
Thank you, Jessica. Is
I,
there-
I, Lorraine Benuto, moved to second the motion.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. With that, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any public comment? No public comment. So with that, we will move to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 2.02 is a presentation and discussion, and we're actually going to move this item to our next meeting. Our presenter is not available today. So we are going to bypass that. Do I need to ask for a motion for that? Because we didn't approve the agenda, right?
You didn't approve the agenda, so no.
So no. Okay, perfect. So with that, we'll move on to item 2.03, which is a presentation and discussion of the district's restorative practices plan used to positively influence student behavior. This is for presentation and discussion only, and it will be presented by Tristan McElhaney, Director of Behavior, and Trish Schaefer, our MTSS Coordinator.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see everyone. Hello, everyone. There we go. I'm Trish Schaefer. I oversee a multi-tiered system of supports, social emotional learning, restorative practices, and behavioral health and management for the district.
I'm Tristan McElhaney. I'm the Director of Student Behavior and Student Supports.
Give us just 1 second and we'll get our presentation up for you. So in short, we're here to talk about the work of restorative practices in Washoe County School District that we have been engaging in for about the last 5 years. So we're going to share a little bit about what we're doing and some legislative mandates. Thank you. There we go. All right. Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. It's nice to be able to talk about our work with you. And so in terms of restorative practices and discipline, like I said, we've been implementing for about 5 years. In 2019 and in 2021, our state passed different pieces of legislation requiring the implementation of restorative practices in our schools. There are currently 7 pieces of legislation that are guiding our work. When we think about these requirements, we think of systemic requirements, we think of requirements at the school, and then we also think about our work with our families and our students, of course. Systemically, we're going to show you today some of the work and revision around our behavior manual and how we're looking at implementing restorative practices. We have been training schools for the last 5 years. About a quarter of our schools were able to go through training pre-pandemic. COVID has obviously impacted our ability to train schools. When we're training with restorative practices, we work to train school teams, not just individuals, and it's a multi-day training. So we've been waiting until we're able to access them again in person and pull them away from our buildings. COVID has obviously impacted some of our ability to pull people out of buildings for multiple days at a time. We're also documenting our restorative efforts in Infinite Campus and looking at reports found in our data warehouse, which is BIG, or the Big Business Intelligence Gateway. The practices that you can see in our schools going on every day, restorative practices, contrary to popular belief, is not just about sitting in circle or after significant harm occurs. The majority of the work actually occurs on a day-to-day basis where we're looking at forming and building communities. We do something called Restore at the Door, which is when there's a disciplinary infraction in the classroom. Instead of the student being sent to the office or administration goes to the classroom, in an effort for the administrator to take over the classroom so that the teacher and the child can step outside and work to resolve conflict. We have school-wide social and emotional learning practices. We also used evidence-based curriculum to teach social and emotional learning. And then we use something called restorative questions, which gives staff a script of 4 to 5 questions to ask both the victim and the offender without presuming blame, and also gives the victim an opportunity for voice. So it's a little bit different in terms of traditional types of disciplinary infractions. We also use something called the early warning system. That is an indicator that is put together through different sets of data: attendance, grades, transiency, disciplinary infractions, and it gives us an indicator if a student may be at risk. And if they are, we try to target them and ensure that they have mentors or different relationships and programs. We use trauma-informed practices, and then we work to train staff in de-escalation techniques. So if and when a student becomes agitated and or very escalated, they are trained in ways to de-escalate peacefully. So those are some of the things that we're doing on a daily basis to help implement. When we think about the intent of our work in restorative practices and the legislation, one of the things, again, contrary, so other districts nationwide, you might have seen articles around attempting to implement restorative practices and it didn't work. Initially, some districts paired it with no suspensions. So what they did is they took all of the previous disciplinary practices and they did a no suspension policy, only restorative, and we know that that doesn't work. When we think about restorative practices, we are holding people accountable for their behavior. However, we're looking to restore them to the community. We're looking for remedies that match a skill, the behavior. So we're thinking about teaching them skills that they need. We know that behavior is communication. It also focuses on a relief for the victim. If there was a victim involved, then we also have a more victim-centered approach in caring for them. And then again, that focus on changing the behavior of the pupil and addressing recidivism.
So I apologize for the length of this blurb, but this is one of the first mentions of restorative practices in our behavior manual. And the behavior manual itself is a philosophy document that helps us figure out ways to ensure students are excluded as little as possible. Trying to find ways to ensure that the things that happen on campus have a pathway back to full inclusion into a school system. What was I going to say? The other part of the behavior manual that's important is that the restorative practices aren't on their own. We have, like Trish was talking about, a lot of the other pieces we have, including social and emotional learning, and what was the other one? PBIS, are used in concert to make sure that the whole goal is to get the students engaged in their school. Again, this is another one that's another blurb that talks about the administrator's role in restorative practices, ensuring that the teacher is getting the support they need by looking at different ways they can intervene. This blurb, I think, is important because it also speaks to the holding the student accountable piece, looking at the different ways we can interact with the student from restore the door, all the way through temporary removal from a classroom based on the philosophy in NRS that gives us the ability to do so. In our behavior manual, this is the behavior matrix that talks about the different infractions that students may experience at school or participate with in school. And you'll see that in terms of restorative practices, our document actually covers both aspects. We have the incident, which is going to be anything that may be exclusionary or any kind of I don't want to say it, but punitive, if you will, in terms of holding the student accountable. But then you'll also see down below in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategy supports are different ways we use restorative practices to couple both the accountability piece with the restoration piece to ensure that students get back to business as usual as quickly as possible.
Okay, and so at the beginning, I spoke about what we do every day, Tier 1. So it happens with all of our students. But then we do have students who occasionally need more support and more intensive need. So for our Tier 2, that would be when there's low-level harm that has occurred. We will focus on restoring community, creating positive relationships, and the emphasis of the law there is that what we're doing to support our students is co-created with our students and our families. So that is you'll see that there in bold, and this is a slide that we used with all of our administrators at the beginning of the year. One of the major tenets of restorative work is doing something with people, not to people. So when we talk about a behavioral infraction that has occurred, we're going to talk with the student and with the family, and one of the questions that we ask is, what do you think needs to be done to make things right? And so that's a huge emphasis in terms of we're not just handing over a suspension, we're really talking about harm has occurred, what do we need to do to repair and restore our community? One of the things we say in restorative practices, we always joke we're going to get t-shirts, is you can't restore a community you didn't build. So we really work to build community and then restore to the community like a family. Harm's going to occur, conflict is going to occur, but then how do we repair and move forward and make things right? With our Tier 3, we might have more intensive, so these are when there's significant harm has occurred, we'll have more intensive supports and needs. And this is also new. One of the things that our students may be considered for an alternative placement for is called habitual discipline. And that requires 5 significant suspensions. So at the 3rd significant suspension, what Washoe County School District is requiring now is that we come out and we work with you and we develop a restorative behavior plan. So we're trying to be proactive in preventing the student to getting to that point of the 5 significant suspensions, because we know that the outcomes for our students, the more they're suspended, the more likely their academic outcomes are going to suffer. And we certainly don't want to see them have to be removed from their school building. So again, really an emphasis on prevention and working with the student and family in terms of our efforts here. I think that's all we have for you. I know we went really quick and got right into the content. Do you have any questions for us?
Not so much a question as a statement, and I really appreciate this presentation because I think a lot of times, maybe out in the public, that restorative practices are misinterpreted for ignoring or not dealing with consequences. And I really appreciate the time and effort that you all put into explaining what those restorative practices are and, more importantly, what they look like during the day, and that it's not about ignoring the behaviors. It's about really looking at the root causes,
Yes.
understanding what the behaviors are, and then how to move forward on all areas for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil.
Hi, Jessica
Hi.
Goguchia. I have two questions. The first is, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about a quarter of our schools being trained pre-pandemic. Can you give a little bit of a breakdown? Are those all elementary schools? Are they like
It was
mixed?
actually a coalition of the willing. So we tend to start when we're doing a rollout, particularly when we're talking about restorative practices. We knew that they needed to have a strong foundation of social and emotional learning and positive behavioral interventions and supports to start this work. So that was one of the requirements, but we really wanted schools who had an appetite for doing this work first. So we trained all levels, but really went with folks who were excited about it and wanted to do it. And it was Tristan was actually in the cohort when he was at HUG. It was a 5-day training over a period of a year.
Great, thank you. That's great
Yeah.
information. And then my second question is, when you're talking about the de-escalation techniques that your teachers and staff are being taught, is there a specific model you use, or is it depending upon age and, school dynamics?
Most often we train them on a protocol called Managing the Cycle of Defiance. And then we have inserted different elements around restorative work and trauma-informed practices. And that guides a school team from calm, which is sort of your ideal situation, all the way up through agitation, up to peak. And then we actually talk a lot about de-escalation and then re-entry. And so we use that protocol most often to train.
Thank you so much.
Ivy, do you have any?
I had one question. So with these restorative practices, in terms of training, are you training just administrators and teachers, or are you also training school police?
We actually have trained school police and working with them, and then we're also hoping, the pandemic sort of put that pause, to work with our students. We have some students we have different programs like Peace Pals or different things like that. But yes, so we have trained school police, and then we hope to also train and work with our students to be restorative leaders in their building.
Perfect. I really like that.
Okay. Thank you, Ivy.
Are there any questions for those of you on Teams?
Yes, this is Liz Flores. For the record, thank you very much for this presentation. This is really fascinating to review, and coming from my background in juvenile justice, this is particularly intriguing. Somebody prior had just asked the question that I was also going to ask regarding the training for school police. I do see that they're part of this response grid, and so I imagine with time there will be some nuances worked out between school police during this process and all of the members on the team. I am curious about when it is that it's decided, or how it is that it's decided whether or not a delinquent act is going to proceed via citation or arrest. And I don't know if this process has delved into that yet.
We actually have Chief Trevino here, so I think he's approaching the podium to answer your question.
Jason Trevino, Chief of Police, for the record. So yeah, Liz, we are part of this, and we're kind of working through the nuances as well. And one of the things that we've talked about from the outset, and even I spoke out or spoke about at the legislative session was the fact that the victim still has the rights of the victim as to whether or not they want to press criminal charges. So for us, that's been kind of one of the nuances we're trying to work through is when you have a victim that wants to press criminal charges, we can't override that victim's constitutional rights for justice in that case, so to speak. But we always try to press for the lowest level of resolution possible. And, Liz, I've worked with you for a long time. My department is always about the why. Why is this happening? Why did this act take place in the first place? And can we resolve it at the lowest level, if at all possible? That's what we're always going to push for. But ultimately, we have to protect the victim.
And in all situations where possible, even when there is a consequence such as that, we work hard to ensure that the offender has an opportunity to be restored to the community and be seen as a member of the community. So they go hand in hand, and I think with your background, you probably have seen that before, but leading reentry circles, if a student's been gone for a while or there's been a major offense, we do attempt to allow for that restoration and repair within the community. It's not always possible, but we do try to work closely to make sure that they're not voted off the island, so to speak.
And this is Liz Flores again for the record. Thank you, Chief Trevino, and thank you to others for the response. I am particularly sensitive to also the position of the victims. So thank you, Chief Trevino, for highlighting that.
Hi, may I comment,
Yes,
Scott?
please.
So one thing to point out is that what Trish and Tristan are talking about are administrative remedies. They're not criminal remedies. So we always, defer to school police when it comes to a criminal investigation or any sort of a prosecution. The only thing I would add is that restorative practices are victim-centered. So this is actually comes from criminal justice background in many cases in which victims really don't have a lot of say in what occurs. So restorative conferences in the most extreme sense, where you're sitting down with victim and offender, is an opportunity for victim to help the offender understand what kind of impact they've had on their life. And that is not something that traditionally occurs. So that's actually one of the reasons why we hope this is promising, is to make sure victims have voice and to try to curb behavior sort of through the avenue of empathy.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the commission? I have a question. On this last slide right before the questions, you talked about 5 acts that constitute habitual. And at the third act, you do some sort of intervention or some. Can you walk me through what that looks like?
Well, we've been into a few of them, and it's an in-depth conversation with the school administration, trying to think about what steps have already been taken, what else we can do to help that student re-engage in the community. And then in some instances, bringing the family in as well, to ensure that the best effort of the school is matched by the best effort of the family to ensure the student gets back to where they need to be.
Awesome. And have you found that those, I don't want to call them mitigations, but those meetings successful? Are they?
Well, I am fairly new to the position, but I've done a few of those well, I did one today through a behavior hearing. And what I can say is that the family was very happy that the nature of a behavior hearing was supportive in nature, rather than trying to tell a student they did something wrong and they were going to have to suffer something. They were very appreciative of the fact that it was a restorative practice and trying to find a way to get them to reintegrate.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we will close item 2.03 and move on to item 2.04. Thank you both for the presentation. It was great information.
Thank you for having us.
Item 2.04 is information and discussion on the efforts aimed at addressing chronic absenteeism in the Washoe County School District. This is for presentation and discussion only. And it looks like we are joined by Rochelle Morello, the Director of Intervention.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. What I'm hoping to do today in my presentation is to give you a brief overview of what chronic absenteeism looked like last year and what are we doing this year to continue to welcome our students back and bring them back into our schools and make sure that they're supported. So what I want to say is before I present these chronic absenteeism data that what you are about to see is not unique to Washoe County School District. Across the nation, our schools saw attendance drop. With the pandemic, there were struggles for all students across our nation. And so you'll see with some of these examples that chronic absenteeism across our nation was an issue last year because of the pandemic and the consequences that resulted from having to close down for some time, and then some other things like housing and those kinds of things. Too far. We did a town hall with students last year, and in which one of them, students put in some words that described how they were feeling at the time, and this was probably back in spring when we did this particular town hall. And you can see the big word there for students back in that time when we were still in a variety of different kinds of educational models. And if you recall, some of them were in person for elementary school. Some of our students that had IEPs could come in person as well, and some other populations like children in transition. We also had a hybrid, and then we had distance learning. And for the vast majority of the students that attended that town hall, they described that situation as being stressful. They talked about not feeling connected with their peers, missing their teachers, missing that interaction, and needing to be in the classroom to interact with their peers and their teachers and to learn. So it was difficult for our students last year. They struggled and they missed each other and the interaction that they had at school. So these are what our chronic absenteeism levels looked like last year. Again, this was not abnormal for the rest of the nation. 39% of our students in our district were chronically absent. So just as a reminder, what is chronic absenteeism? That is 10% of the days that students are enrolled in school. And so that percentage fluctuates as time goes on, and depending on how many days students are enrolled and how many days they either attend or miss. So on average, 39% of our students were chronically absent or missed 10% or more of the school year. Our elementary students last year were 20%. That blue column was 2018-19, so that's kind of our average and typical years. You'll see our middle school students had a significant increase in chronic absenteeism, and our high school students, in particular our high school seniors, saw the most increase in chronic absenteeism at 59%. When we break that into race and ethnicity, you'll see that our top three student populations that missed the most school were American Indians, African American, and Pacific Islanders, all above 50% chronic absenteeism. So you'll see that big jump from that blue 2018-19 year to 2020-2021. There was a significant increase in chronic absenteeism. And then if we break this down by special population, free and reduced lunch you'll see is FRL. IEP are students that receive special education services. EL are our English learners. Children in transition are our students that are experiencing homelessness. GT are our gifted, talented, and then our foster students. So you'll see our students that were homeless had the largest amount of chronic absenteeism in this data. Okay, any questions before I move on?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
In your overall 39%, do you count exclusions as absence?
No. Do you mind pulling up that PSA? Okay. So what I'd like for you to tell you today is what are we doing about this? So what I can say today, as I looked at our database, 20% of our students are chronically absent. In a normal year, about 17% of our students are chronically absent. So we've seen a huge decrease in absenteeism in our school district. So we're really happy to hear that. But we want to continue to get the message out that attendance counts, that we want to see our students in school We want to welcome them back, and we want to see them every day. So we've been doing quite a bit to welcome our students back, reach out to them, support our families as they continue to face the results of our pandemic. And so we were able to secure funding for 4 new attendance officers. So we have a total of 10 attendance officers. That's reduced our caseloads significantly. So we're able to respond more frequently, do more home visits, support our families, visit them, and provide additional support for them. We also have 6 re-engagement specialists that work with our students where we're trying to welcome them back and re-enroll them in our schools. We, in our Children in Transition program, are really focusing on how do we support our students that have experienced homelessness. You saw that big increase in Children in Transition in one of our slides. We'll get to that. Hold on. And so we are really targeting our students in particular at high school and supporting them, providing them case management, identifying the barriers to attendance, and then addressing those. And that can even be paying for housing for our students. We are partnering with Human Services Agency. They're really looking closely at our students in foster care and how we can provide additional intensive support for students in foster care. Very often they have lots of transitions, and so we want to try to reduce that and provide as much support to them as possible. We continue our re-engagement efforts. Our Student Attendance Review Board started October 14th, so we're working with some of our most severely chronically absent students in providing supports and collaborating and partnering with families to identify those barriers and provide supports. And we started an attendance campaign, and this campaign is a partnership with our communications department, and we are about to show you a PSA that our students over at Sparks High School developed for us. This was a student-led PSA that we developed about a month ago, where students led it, wrote it, answered the questions, and told us their stories about what works for them. And so I'm really excited today to talk to you guys a little bit about that. And there we go.
I have actually struggled with attendance. I've gone missing a lot of days of school. I'm actually here and participating. I'm in leadership now. I'm enjoying every last second of it.
I feel like making friends with the right people and also talking to people about education will also help you come to school more.
I really struggled with attendance because I just wanted to have fun, of course. I'm taking RJ, RGC, and leadership. It really motivates me and gives me authority, really.
I took really good classes this year that I really, really wanted, and they make me really happy, and that's why I'm here every day. My grades are important to me.
My inspiration for making school more important for me was my mom, because although she didn't get a lot of help that I do now, she wants me to pursue more and become more than what she ever got growing up.
I was always late to class. I never really cared about going to class, so I would just come late. I overcame that because by actually getting more motivated to do my schoolwork.
I know some of us do not want to go to school. I get that, but what advice I have: participate, be involved, do things you love, join a sport.
Even though you might not think that classes have a purpose, it'll always come back to you regardless if it's later on in life, a career you choose, or an opportunity you're given. You'll always need something from school, and that's why it's important to stay in school.
Major tip: take the classes that you really love.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. I asked for so much help last year, and my teachers were so happy about it.
I think it's important for students to come to school every day because when you come to school, you're more motivated to do your schoolwork. It's just really important to come to school because it helps you and everybody else.
All right, so we're super proud of the work that the Sparks High School students did on that. They wanted to be solution focused. They wanted to give other students ideas of things that worked for them and engaged them, even when they went through their own struggles. So we're glad and so happy to see that. We were also able to cut that down to 30 seconds. And so we have PSAs that we have announced on September 30th as a part of our larger attendance campaign, where we distributed this information, additional information, on social media. KMPB is running these PSAs as well, and we're hoping other news channels will pick them up too. We've written some radio PSAs, so hopefully you'll hear it on the radio as well, just to, encouraging attendance and where do you go when you do have questions or you need some additional help. How do you get that? And then on our district website, you'll see some of that as well. We partnered with United Way of Northern Nevada, who also announced their own attendance campaign in partnership with Washoe County School District and other districts, focusing on very elementary school students and attendance for them too. So you may see information from them and a PSA that they are also developing. We've developed some outreach materials in collaboration with our family school partnerships, and I'm going to pass this around so you can see, but it's a family guide to attendance so that families can better understand exclusions. What does that look like? How do we do makeup work? How much time do we have to do makeup work when we're excluded? Those sorts of things. So I'll pass this around for you to take a look at. In January, we're getting ready to launch an attendance messaging campaign. So we have one area where we will be sending out attendance messages through text messages and emails to families, giving them strategies of how to encourage attendance. So families will be receiving those text messages after we come back from winter break. Make sure that I didn't forget anything. We are developing a principal toolkit for principals to give them strategies and interventions to reach out to their families, build relationships, and make sure that they provide support to their families and give them ideas of how to continue to engage their students. We provide training and support. So myself and then our attendance coordinator, Doug Taylor, has gone out and we work directly with schools to provide them support in terms of how does it look when we're regularly looking at attendance data? How do we intervene? How do we look at it through multi-tiered systems of support to make decisions on when we provide interventions for students? We are going to be conducting, starting on Monday, focus groups with administrators, attendance administrators, assistant principals, counselors, and principals around what works and what doesn't work and what other supports might they need as well. So we will be doing a variety of those. And our family school partnerships have developed additional videos that can be found on the district website to help families understand attendance as well in in two languages, English and Spanish. And that is all we're doing right now. I can say too that we're developing and did develop another PSA for middle school students with Dilworth students. That should be released right after our Thanksgiving holiday. And then we'll do a final one with elementary students sometime in the winter, spring. And that's it. Any questions for me?
I have some questions back at the graphs.
Yeah.
You mentioned that we are about 20% now.
Yes.
What do you think are some of the changes besides going to school every day in person for all ages? What are some of maybe the barriers that got us to 39% last year that have been broken?
Okay, so I think one of the things is that we're in person. Everyone's in person. We have buses to the best of our ability that we're providing transportation for students. Families are back at work, or for the most, a lot of them are back at work, trying to get back in the job market. We continue to have struggles with attendance. Some of our older students had to go work to help make ends meet. Childcare is an issue, and so before and after school programs are not as large as they used to be, and so childcare continues to be an issue. Housing costs, the cost of a home and rent right now are extremely expensive for families to to afford. So we've been responding through our family resource centers, and I know Chair Benton, that you're familiar with our family resource centers, providing emergency rental assistance. There's been some funding through federal programs that have provided additional staff like attendance officers, additional staff through family resource centers so that we can respond when families are in crisis to provide food and housing and those kinds of things. So it's still sort of a complex situation, but I think for the most part, the decrease in attendance, from my opinion, the decrease in chronic absenteeism is that students want to be back in school. They want to be with their peers. They want to be with their teachers, and they're happy to be back in session. And so because we have that, they're happy to be there.
Awesome. And from what I'm understanding, the case managers don't just treat the absenteeism, they treat the whole picture, give some wraparound services.
That's right. My department, when we're working with students that are chronically absent, we want to understand why. It's not a punitive approach. It's why are we struggling with attendance? What can we do to support you? And what can we do in collaboration and partnership with you to help you break down those barriers? So it could be transportation, it could be anything.
Thank you.
Yes.
Lorraine Benuto here for the record. I have a question to sort of piggyback off of the discussion that was just had. Do we have a sense of the different causal factors for absenteeism? I know you touched on that just a tiny bit, and it sounds like you're trying to get some more data on that.
Well, what I can say is that, there are lots of reasons why students are chronically absent. If we just look at the pandemic, obviously that was a huge reason why students were chronically absent. Distance learning was hard for students. It was hard to stay motivated. If you recall that first or second slide that I showed, students described feeling stressed, feeling worried, feeling overwhelmed. And so that was difficult for students. Coming back, they feel more supported. They feel more engaged because they're in person and they can build those relationships. If we look at chronic absenteeism overall, it can be transportation. It can be students who are feeling unsuccessful academically. It could be things that are occurring in the home that are preventing students from coming to school. There's so many reasons, and that's really why you have to kind of sit down and build those relationships with students to better understand what is the reason. So again, like I said, we saw a lot of high school students go to work. And so it was difficult for them to work and be in school. And they continue to work. And so trying to manage that and balance that work as well, because now they've become a source of income for their family.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ivy, go.
Okay. I thought that was a great presentation. And to almost like piggyback off of you, I will say, talking to my peers this year, I mean, it's great to be back in school and be with all my old friends again. And it's like we haven't seen each other for 2 years, but everybody's come back and so much has happened, but also not happened.
Right.
So it's really motivated us to be back in school. But I'd say like a lot of the big things that were really preventing kids from wanting to go to school last year were mental health. And I've talked a lot about it with my other peers, and a lot of us didn't know, but there was a huge uptick in anxiety, and we all thought we were dealing with it alone when we really weren't. And so everybody was seeking out those mental health options of therapy and different resources they could use to the best of their abilities, along with like a large part of the stress factor, and I've talked to other students from different schools, was different expectations from teachers of not knowing how they wanted assignments to be done, how they wanted them turned in, and how rigorous their course was still going to be. Now it's kind of reverted back to they're just doing their original plans because they can do that now. And I had one question regarding last year. Did you guys start to in the springtime when more students could start to go back? Was that when a lot of the attendance started to like increase again?
You mean in the spring?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'd have to look back. I don't know specifically around that time period. I mean, overall, attendance was a struggle because students did continue with distance learning. So I don't know that we saw big fluctuations in attendance in the springtime. But I'm so glad that you mentioned mental health. And I neglected to talk about that because in that word collage that we had, stress was the big thing. So students felt a lot of anxiety, and they still feel it today. And they're still working on it today. But they're in classrooms, they have the support of their peers now and their teachers, their counselors, their social workers. So great to see that. But I'm really glad that you mentioned that too. And I can look a little bit more into that time period, but my guess is that we didn't see big fluctuations of attendance. We are now, though, because everyone is back in person.
Yeah, I just remembered because all the sports and activities came back,
Right.
and a lot of students have said that's what gave me purpose again to come to school, because that was something that I loved and enjoyed doing. And I remember the hallways began to be flooded and you couldn't get around anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you might be right. And that's one thing that students said. They missed the clubs, they missed, prom, they missed all those kinds of things that were really exciting for students. Sports was a huge thing. Participating in music and band, all those extracurricular activities that really engage students, they really missed that last year.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Rochelle from the commission? Rochelle, I appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you.
Your team is amazing.
Thank
and
you.
I know this is just one of the buckets that you fill every day, so thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
There's lots of buckets.
Yes. And with that, we will move on to item 2.05, which is a presentation and discussion of the threat assessment process used to determine possible threats from students. This is for presentation and discussion only. And I have Catherine Loudon as the presenter, but this does not look like Catherine Loudon at the table. So I will turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves.
I'm Brandy Olson, the coordinator of psychological services.
I'm Brad Mull. I'm a school psychologist with the Washoe County School District.
So,
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
thank you. Listed on the screen are the school psychologists that have had a big hand in updating our threat assessment process. Brian was the only one that could make it today, but they've all been working really hard on this for the last few years. So we recently did a shift in the threat assessment process for a couple of different reasons. One, making sure that we aligned with the NRS, which requires us to have a tool that assists in responding to threats against the school by a student. So we wanted to make sure we had a really robust tool in place that could be used for that. We also worked really hard to align our tool with best practices and national standards. We gathered information from the Virginia model, the Secret Service Threat Assessment Center, and the Colorado model when creating our model for the district. We also wanted to ensure to follow guidance from the Washoe County School District Legal Department, which helped us differentiate between when an assessment could be completed by a mental health professional, such as a school psychologist or school counselor or school social worker, and what role a building administrator could take in that process as well. So the purpose of the threat assessment is to help identify and assess and manage individuals and groups that may pose a threat of targeted violence. So it doesn't look at whether the student made a threat, but looks at whether they actually pose a threat. So it's not a predictive tool, and really the end result is to help come up with a safety plan that will protect the student and support the student, as well as protect the buildings and any potential victims. A threat is just an expressed intent to hurt one another, so that could be done in writing, on social media, verbally. We also work with our mental health colleagues, so if a student makes a threat but also expresses suicidal ideation, we work with our school counseling team for a suicide risk assessment. And if the threat aligns with bullying, we also work with the bullying investigation team as well. So the first thing we did when we made the shift to the new threat assessment model is to make sure it was all a team process. So it's not just one person conducting any part of the threat assessment anymore. Historically, it was kind of the school psych show and they would do a lot of that legwork, but we recognized in the research that it was really important to have a team of individuals being part of that.
All right, well, this is where the flow chart should have lived, but you all should have a handout of that available for yourself. So my intent was not to go through the process in detail, but just to provide you access with kind of knowing what the process is. One of the things that we really kind of put some emphasis in this particular model is the pathway to violence. The Safe School Initiative concluded that most attackers did not threaten their targets directly, but did engage in a pattern of behavior and pre-attack behaviors that suggested that they did have the inclination to commit targeted violence within a school. So what we found within best practices is considering this pathway to violence, right? So targeted violence starts with an idea, and it moves into a plan, and it proceeds into preparation, and it all culminates with a targeted act of violence. Each of these steps along the pathway to violence should be considered an opportunity to intervene with a student, right? The overarching theme is to support the student. We want to find where they're falling on that pathway to violence and create a plan to intervene and stop their trajectory. It's really important to kind of note that based on what's going on in a student's life, whether that's adverse childhood experiences or a myriad of factors, they can move up and down that pathway from one day, 1 year to the next. As I kind of mentioned, each one of these steps is an opportunity to intervene, right? So what we know is that the most important piece is for us to act quickly, gather information, put those pieces of the puzzle together, and figure out how we can support that student, right? So we're going to go through that process and gather all the information historically, because we know that there's a pattern of behavior that exhibits. So this is sort of how we're doing that process, and we're doing it as a team. And the things that we consider in that process, and it is a team process, there's 11 key questions that were introduced by the United States Secret Service. We're not going to go through those. We consider red zone behaviors like law enforcement contact, discipline, adverse childhood experiences, and a number of other kind of factors that alone don't mean that a student will commit targeted violence, but in conjunction and consideration with the pathway to violence and the threat are key factors to consider. We also consider protective factors, things that are protecting the student, right? Like having strong relationships within the building, because our overall goal is to support the student, right? And this is a caveat that we kind of put and we emphasize is that there is no tool to predict with any level of certainty that a student will commit an act of targeted violence. Our goal is to find out where a student is in that pathway to violence and create a plan to intervene. That's the presentation. Questions?
Thank you both for the presentation. It's a lot of great information, a lot to take in. I'll open it up to the commission. It looks like Dr. McNeil.
Thank you very much. So just real quickly, Brandy and Brian, I think it would be important too, you all just didn't kind of come here one day and say, hey, we're going to realign the threat assessment. This has been a labor of love, and I say that with all the intents because you all have spent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lamarca, years on putting this system in place, and it actually started in a pilot project with several of our schools that had to work through some of these issues to see what the right ingredients were with the threat assessment. So can you talk just a little bit about how did we get from point A to point B and now where we are now?
So this started about 5 years ago because it was my first year in the district and this is my fifth. So we've been working on it since then. We came up with a model that we wanted to try out about the year before the pandemic hit. So we piloted with two areas.
Two areas, roughly 8 schools.
And to get feedback from administrators, counselors, school social workers on what things worked well in the pilot, what things maybe we needed to tweak to make it work better for the schools. One thing that came up in the pilot is that, right, initially 5 years ago, the initial inquiry was done by the school psychologist. During the pilot, we modified that and had it done by the school administrator. They liked that a little bit more because it was more timely. It usually aligned with questions they would ask a student anyway if an incident were to happen at the building. We did modify it again before this final rollout so that it would be a team process. So it would be the school administrator and with the social worker or psychologist or counselor sitting in with them, so nobody does this alone. The year of the pandemic, we started piloting it with about half of the schools in the district, and then that sort of went on pause when COVID hit. And this year, we've had a lot of support from Dr. McNeil and OSL in rolling this out. We've been able to train all of the counselors, all of the psychologists, all of the social workers, and I think all of the administrators now on the new process.
Yeah, a lot of people in the last month.
Are there questions from the commission?
I had one regarding like when another student makes like a threat, really any violence, but more specifically like a bomb threat or a shooting threat. When is that taken, like, because you talk about like the plan, the pathway to violence, when is that ultimately like considered like, okay, we need to evacuate all students or we need to like take precautions to the next level?
When an initial threat comes in, we examine that threat, and obviously we work with law enforcement based on things that may pose great safety risk to school. What we have found is at any point during the process, if we believe a crime has been committed, the threat assessment process goes on pause while law enforcement can conduct their investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Ivy. Thank you. Dr. LaMarca.
Scott, I just want to add a couple quick things, if that's okay. Part of context here is, and Catherine was sort of part of the original group because, and this is going to be kind of a long answer, but the behavioral manual and our restorative discipline plan includes this. It also includes crisis intervention, and so Catherine's group counseling works very closely with our emergency manager as well as school psychology as we respond to crisis within the building. Within the behavior manual that Mr. McElhaney went through a little bit of an example, there are several incidences that call for threat assessments. It could be a threat of mass violence, but it could also be retaliation. There's a host of things that can create this need. And so we just felt it was important for you and the commission to see that this is like one tool in a quiver of tools that are part of this restorative plan that's really focused on supporting students, making sure they feel included, but also keeping everyone safe and taking action when necessary. The only other thing I wanted to say, and then I'll be quiet, is this is School Psychology Awareness Week. Last year, you provided an item where we recognize school psychologists, and the Board of Trustees is doing that tomorrow evening, I believe. But Brandy runs our school psychology department. Brian is an amazing school psychologist, been with the district for many years. And we have, I think, 48 school psychologists do incredible work every day. And so I just wanted to say thank you to them.
Thank you.
Catherine.
I just want to echo, it's Catherine Loudon for the record, coordinator of school counseling. I just want to echo what Dr. LaMarca said. Our school psychologists are so essential and so important and such vital parts of the whole comprehensive educational process that we have. And counselors and school psychologists in a building and school social workers are all partners. And so we might support the initial threat assessment, but then collaborate and work together on the safety planning and the follow-up and a lot of the other things that go along with it. And so that's part of the reason why we were there. But I just, especially Brian Mall and definitely Brandy Olson, the work that they have done on this process and the research and the statewide collaboration with Southern Nevada and the balance of the state to ensure that Washoe County School District has the absolute best and the most comprehensive has been very apparent and definitely deserving of recognition. So happy School Psychologist Week. I'm sure your counselors and school social workers and administrators and everyone will be talking about it, but I wanted to make sure that I got to say it too. And thank you for all of this. This is just really one of the pride of the state things that we have that a lot of people don't know is a pride of the state. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's important to recognize that this is like a very small snapshot of a very comprehensive process. So thank you. But yeah, it's really, and we, within our process, we do talk a lot about restorative justice, restorative practices in terms of repairing relationships, because we know that that idea starts a lot of times with a grievance or a conflict on a school site, and trying to repair those relationships when it is at that idea phase, or even before we get to that idea.
And I did want to add, when we create the safety plan, we don't just create it and leave it. We've actually built in follow-up schedules and follow-up timeframes, so we can always keep an eye on our students at risk and make sure we're providing them the support that they need.
I have a question that maybe relates to both this item and the last item. Have you guys seen a correlation in attendance to any threats or any types of threats? Has there been some correlation with attendance, and how is that addressed in the district?
No, well, one of the things is that we do, one of the first things in our process is doing the threat inquiry prior to consideration of any disciplinary procedures, which could result in taking a student off campus. We want students on campus. We want to support them at their schools. You know, we write our plans for students to always return to our schools, but there's not really a correlation between students being like habitually absent and threats.
Thank you.
There's probably some association between the underlying factors that might lead to both sorts of behaviors.
Any questions from our commissioners on teams? No? Okay. Thank you both very much for the information. It was wonderful. And we'll move on to our next presentation, which is item 2.06, a presentation, discussion, and update on the Brave Spaces initiative. This is for presentation and discussion only, and it looks like our presenter is Lanisha Battle, the Director of Equality and Diversion, and Catherine Loudon.
Good afternoon. I'm Lanisha Battle, the Director of Equity and Diversity for Washoe County School District.
Good afternoon, and I'm Catherine Loudon. I'm the Coordinator of School Counseling. We're really excited about what we're going to talk about today, which has really been an effort in cross-departmental collaboration. And so actually, prior to Lanisha Battle coming and joining our team at Washoe County School District as the Director of Equity, we had started this work within our district. And it has really expanded under her leadership, and we have seen it delivered with our first training. And so we're going to describe a little bit about what a Brave Space is and what the Brave Space program is. And then we'll also have Gina Session will be joining some of our presentation, and also our school social worker and crisis intervention specialist, Beth Schrader, who has a part in this.
All right. So our Brave Space is linked directly with our district strategic goal 5.1, and that has to do with a climate of belonging and self-worth, inclusive practices throughout our school district and at all of our school sites, providing equitable practices, strategies, and materials for our students and staff and families. The purpose of our Brave Space program is to provide a welcoming environment for our students regardless of sex, race, and or gender identity. So we want to make sure that all students are included, all staff, all families, but especially our students. We wanted to provide a space for them to be brave, to be able to come and approach and discuss sensitive topics with staff as they need to, and to provide additional support for our students in these times we're coming out, or still in the midst of, I want to say coming out of a pandemic. And a lot of our students are needing and asking for additional supports. So the Brave Space, moving from the safe space to the Brave Space, made the most sense for our school district, so that we did have that welcoming space and a brave space for students to feel they could go to any of our adults who have received the training. And the goal, of course, is to have all of our spaces in our schools to be brave spaces.
So you might be wondering, what is a brave space, and what exactly is this partnership that we're talking about and all the individuals? And what it is it's capacity building for our staff. It's a training that we put on collaboratively across departments. And as my colleague Trish Schaefer described, it's an opportunity for those who are willing, people who are early adopters, who have a passion for students and want to reach out to them and provide support. And I will say that initially I thought, oh, it's going to be all counselors and social workers and school psychologists, because often when we talk about brave spaces, that's what we hear. But actually, at our first rollout and initiation, we had teachers, we had administrators, we had a cross-section of district staff, all early adopters, passionate about kids who wanted to be a part of it. And so in this capacity building, we talk about some of our components that we're teaching about in the Brave Space program across multiple departments. And we talk about issues like confidentiality, about the how to receive and support a student who might have had thoughts or feelings about suicide, or if there is bullying involved or things like that. So that's a big part of the program, is building the capacity so that the staff member can provide assistance and care where that's needed for that particular student.
So a part of the training is devoted to confidentiality, because that is a big part. If we're having a brave space, students have to feel comfortable to be able to come to an adult and feel supported and feel like they have some confidentiality in what they are either confiding in, asking about, because it's not just a confiding thing. It could be that they have questions about something they've seen in media, something they've seen over social media, or something that's happening in or around their environment. So one big thing that is covered is confidentiality and being sensitive to issues regarding confidentiality. Of course, because we are adults and mandated reporters, there are certain things that have to be reported no matter what. So if a student comes with child abuse, or sexual exploitation, bullying, suicidal ideations, anything under the Administrative Regulation 4560, those things will have to be reported. But there has to be a balance, as you see in bullet number 2, between protecting student privacy and duties as a mandatory reporter as required by the state. So we want to make sure that there is a balance so that students feel supported and that they feel like they can come and to these brave spaces to talk about the things that they need to talk about, but still understand that there are some things that we have to report. That is not to break their confidentiality, but to keep them protected in their environment. So again, why a brave space? We're moving from a safe space to a brave space. Again, providing those opportunities and that space for students to come and get the support that they need. When we are thinking about students have been reporting more stress and asking for more emotional support, especially since we've been in this pandemic. They're inside, they're not able to have access to their friends, and to some of the adults, the ease of accessibility to the adults in a school site that they would usually have because of what happened over the last 2 years. So it's caused a lot more mental stress, a lot more, we've seen a lot more of everyone seeing the news with the racial tensions, the Capitol riots, some very unsettling times that have come in, and our students are watching that. So we wanted to make sure that we have a space and a place for them to be able to freely come and talk about some of the things that they are experiencing that are causing that stress.
Lanisha?
Yes.
So when you talk about Brave Space, is it a one-on-one situation, or
Yes.
can there be, if 3 students are feeling the same way and they come to an adult, they can all 3 talk together, or is it, let's break it out into one-on-one session to maintain that confidentiality?
I think it's dependent upon the students and their comfortability, because we don't want to break the confidentiality of the students, but I think if they come with a group of students and all those students probably are coming with the same thing, I think it would be the call of the adult that if there is a tension where they've decided to go to the Brave Space, then it would probably be the one-on-one, let me talk to this party, let me talk to this party, and then to echo what was talked about earlier, maybe they come back together in a restorative to come to some type of conclusion.
I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late, I apologize. But Gina Session, Director of the Department of Civil Rights Compliance. Just to give a little overview of some of the content of the Brave Space training, my other team members have indicated, a big piece of this is capacity building and professional development for the people that are interested in providing a Brave Space. And so during that first part of the presentation, we kind of go into some of the background about Board Policy 1310, which is our political activity policy. We have a discussion about protected classes and the history of the 14th Amendment and why the individuals are protected under federal law, under Title IX, which prohibits discrimination based on sex or gender, and then Title VI, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. And I talk a little bit about sexual harassment and the new regulations that are under Title IX. And then we discuss the staff speech regulation, which is 5161, and how that kind of works with Board Policy 1310, which is the political activity policy. And then also, I think I have Title VI up there a little bit twice, but then we also talk about, in relation to the confidentiality piece, how they are required to report bullying under Chapter 388. We want to make sure that, because it is a sensitive balance about what our reporting requirements are as staff and guarding the confidentiality of the students. And we want to make sure that our people that are participating in Brave Space have a really clear idea about those boundaries so that they don't get in a position where a student is feeling violated or that they were, have mistrust for the staff member because they have to report something that somehow that they violated their trust. And so we think those are really important topics to go over in the Brave Space training.
And what's so excited about that in that session 1 is the staff members that participate in the training, and for the record, this is Catherine Loudon, Coordinator of Counseling, have the opportunity to work with Gina Session and ask questions and talk about things and work as really become acquainted with one another and talk about exactly what the laws are and what our district policies are and regulations around that. So the second section of Brave Space, and I'm going to call her up here to join me and our group here, she can either come to the podium or you can sit in my seat, is a LGBTQ education. And in our district, we haven't had many opportunities for our staff to really have a dialogue and some intensive training around the Equity 101 and, terms related to this specifically. So, Beth Schrader is a part of the Counseling and School Social Work Department as a crisis school social worker. And we partnered with Yvonne Allen from Cherokee Meadows Community College to really give this information. I'm going to turn it over to Beth so that she can describe section 2 of the Brave Space training.
Beth Schrader for the record. So session 2 is really going to have an explanation of acronyms and terminology. We're going to go over definitions. We're going to discuss use of terms within the LGBTQ youth community. We're going to talk about the importance of accurate use of those terms when working with youth. Understanding youth fluidity with terms is also incredibly important. And basically, one of the reasons that we thought this section was so incredibly important is because this is a high-risk population of our student body, and that being able to have supportive adults in a building is so incredibly important. And so within that, we want adults to be comfortable and understanding when talking with these youth. So just some stats that we know from GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. 31.8% of LGBTQ identifying students missed at least one school day in the past month because of feeling unsafe or uncomfortable. And so this section of Brave Space is about keeping those students in school, keeping them connected, and making sure that they have, again, the supports that they need. 8 out of 10 students report being verbally harassed because of their sexual orientation. And then we know that this population of youth are 4 times more likely to attempt on their life. And so by keeping those brave spaces intact, we allow for those students to be able to have that supportive adult. So we have recommendations that we also kind of walk throughout our presentation. And I think the end goal is the Trevor Project, which is one of our references and resources throughout this presentation, says that one supportive adult in an environment can decrease an LGBTQ youth's risk of suicide by 40%. And so that is, this section is, Yvonne and I worked really hard on it, and we're very impassioned by this work and the students in our schools.
Okay, and for the record, this is Catherine Loudon again, and coordinator of counseling. So there are resources given out to the teachers and staff members to try to provide the support. But the other thing that we do is we give information to them about where to go for help, where to get additional information as well. And also how to reach back to us. So they have Gina Sessions' contact and can reach out to Gina after section 1. They can reach out to the Counseling and Social Work Department and our department, as well as the Equity Department. And we work comprehensively as a team on the content of these trainings, as well as our response and outreach to it.
For the record, Lanisha Battle, Director of Equity and Diversity. So the third session of our Brave Space training is around cultural competency and a little bit, and some equity work as well. The first thing we do delve into are the 5 specialists and myself, and encouraging all of our participants to reach out if they are needing, or if they have questions or need more support resources around cultural competency. So one of our session goals, the first one is we want to facilitate a lot of discussions. So a lot of what we do in the third session is around discussions and building capacity, of course, within the participants so that they're able to be cultural competent leaders throughout their buildings. And one way is gaining some foundational knowledge of the district's equity framework. So, and talking about that, we're talking about inclusion for all students, families, and staff. We're talking about all of our demographics, all of our special populations, being sensitive in the way that we approach many of our conversations with our different cultures, and getting some context around culture and our cultural groups. And also building the capacity by cultivating cross-cultural connections, relationships, and intentionally creating brave spaces for all of our students, families, and staff. So the first thing we kind of delve into is what is equity. We make sure that when we are talking about this, we let our participants know that when we are talking equity, we are focusing on educational equity, and that's different than equality. So we do a big discussion about equity versus equality and how they are different, and how equality is giving everybody the same thing, and equity is giving everyone what they need to accomplish the same end goal, which we know for Washoe County School District is graduation and college and career readiness. Then we do go into defining culture, and our main takeaway for our participants is that they understand if they have a pulse, they have a culture. And the very last thing we do say is that once you leave the professional development or the professional learning, that all participants know that they have a culture. No one ever asks them, what's your culture? And they say, I don't have one. Culture is more than just a shade of brown. It's more than just an ethnicity or a race. It is what makes up each and every one of us who are sitting in this room today. And we also talk a little bit about the difference between culture and diversity, and so that we get a lot of clarification around that. Two people sitting in a room is diversity, because all of your lived experiences makes you diverse. So even if you're the same ethnicity, it's diversity if two different people are sitting in a room. When we talk culture, it's all the things that make you different. So it could be age, it could be gender, sexual orientation, language, religion, where you are geographically. All those things make up culture. And then going into the culturally proficient leader, we talk about that is clearly understanding one's own assumptions, beliefs, and values about people and cultures that are different from yours. So if you have cultural proficiency, if you're striving to be culturally proficient, because we talk about never really truly being culturally proficient, because that means that you have arrived. We know that our culture changes constantly. We are always dealing with something different. Everything is changing in our world constantly, even the state of education when the pandemic came. So that is something that we're always dealing with. So you're never really fully there, but you're always striving to get there. So when we're dealing with cultural proficiency, that is being conscious of your culture and someone else's, and acknowledging and making sure that you acknowledge and understand someone else's culture, as well as acknowledging and understanding your own. And then we have 4 strategies for advocacy: interrupting, questioning, educating, and echoing. All strategies that we talk about and give our participants time to discuss and practice during breakouts. So during some breakout sessions, because of course this was virtual and not in person, so that they can get some practice with responding to some different scenarios. So for instance, in questioning, why would you say that? Or what do you mean by that? So just asking the student, or it could be an adult possibly as well, what they mean by what they are saying. So just getting some clarification so that we're not making assumptions about what anyone is saying. And then we do give a reference slide with just some books on cultural proficiency that we use here in the district: Fish Out of Water, The Culturally Proficient School, and Culturally Proficient Leadership.
All right, and we're very proud. This is our placard for the Brave Space program. We worked with the Student Advisory Council to come up with the design. The students were very excited about the Brave Space program and about the challenge to come up with a nice design for our placard. And so everyone that completes the 3 courses gets the placard display in their classroom. And so our participants, we have them up in schools now. They were sent out last week, and I'm hoping, we got a message out to do school announcements at all the schools that have the placard, so that students are aware what this new placard means. So I'll pass it around if you all want to have a look at that. All right. Oh, one other thing, I'm sorry. I'll just add that the placard, the nice thing about the placard is that it's a district-approved design, and so staff members can display it without any kind of issue, and students know what it signifies. All right.
And with that, the last slide has our contact information, so that you can have that as well. And we make sure that, as I mentioned before, that we give that to all the participants. We're already in the process of planning the next 3-part section for Brave Space to continue training and working as a team. And we've received some feedback from some of the participants who want to stay in contact with us and also want to stay in contact with one another. And that was exciting to see the staff members wanting us to have a Teams or have another way for them to communicate and work together.
I can add. So we are going to try to put together some Teams kinds of meetings at the end of the year this year, so that people can share experiences that are the participants, the staff participants in the program. And I think the demand has been high. We're getting a lot of people asking when we're going to do our next training, so, which I believe is next semester, beginning of the year. So. All right.
Any other questions?
Jessica Goguchia, I don't have a question, but I think this is beautiful, and I really appreciate hearing about this, and I'm really excited to hear how this impacts our students and families in the schools who have been going through so much. And I keep thinking, as you guys are presenting, what a beautiful thing this would be if it allowed, in time and training to become group opportunities for students who are sharing similar experiences, across all of the avenues that you guys spoke about.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the commissioners on Teams? Well, Lanisha, I would like to welcome you. I appreciate you coming to the commission and presenting. I don't think we've ever had the director of equity and diversity in front of us. So it means a lot that you took some time out to spend with us and let us understand the work that you do. And from what I'm hearing and all the items that we've had today, it's a collaboration through the school district, right? It's not one person. And I think there's some take home for us as a commission that each one of you guys have a seat at the table to make the students and their families feel safe in the district. And I think that's important to us as a commission. So thank you to both you and Catherine and Gina for this presentation.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we will close item 2.06 and we will bring it to item 2.07, which is the discussion and possible action to determine tentative content, logistics, and marketing of our 2022 safety forum. This is for possible action, and I will lead the conversation, but really I want to hear from the commission about maybe some ideas of what we should talk about at the safety forum that is held in the late spring, early summer. Historically, it's been in May, but it's really up to the commission, so I'm just going to open it up to all of you for some discussion.
Chair Benton, this is Jessica Goguchia. One thing I would love to have discussion around the potential of, conversations around fentanyl awareness and this epidemic that's really sweeping Washoe County and actually most of the United States. coming from the universe that I live and work in, this is something that is really, really, really on the forefront. And we are just losing more and more of our students and family members to just, I think, lack of awareness that when we're purchasing, people are purchasing substances that they don't know what's in them, and that might be an opportunity for families to understand, opioid overdoses are actually something that can be overturned. There are ways, there are safety resources to have, just education and for families to be able to carry Narcan and things that can really overturn that. And I think that's just a really important conversation.
Absolutely, I would agree. Any other ideas of some topics? I know in the past we've talked about bullying. This last forum we had breakout sessions that were led by some of our commissioners, some of our community members around suicide prevention. I think that's always a hard conversation to have, but necessary in the world that we live in.
Lorraine Benuto here for the record. My other thought is just with absenteeism being such a huge problem and the ethnic disparities that we see in absenteeism, I don't know quite how it would fit, but it just seems like such an important topic to be addressed in some way.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we have some great topics on today's agenda that could really be put out for some of our parents and community members. I think hearing what we've heard today, including absenteeism, as Lorraine mentioned, it's really shed some light on some of the things that I think they all go hand in hand, what we had on our agenda. So we can certainly, if you want to throw an idea out, if you want absenteeism to be by itself, we can certainly do that. Historically, what we do is we throw out ideas and then we come together and decide what are the big topics that we want to talk about. And we did combine some topics last year so that parents got the best of the information provided to them.
This is Liz Flores, and I may be speaking out of turn. I'm uncertain. I'm unfamiliar with the forum. So I don't know if this recommendation is appropriate or not. So please let me know. But I know one thing from our perspective that we're seeing an increase in, and I think nationally, driver safety has been an issue during COVID. And even though folks were we're not driving as much as a result of COVID because people were homebound, there actually was an increase in fatalities and in road incidents during that time. And there's various theories as to why that may be. But teen driving continues to be an issue, I know, from our perspective. And so I'm not sure, again, if this is the appropriate forum for that. But we do have resources that we use within our agency in conjunction with the state of Nevada NHP to provide as many resources as possible on education and training for particularly families who oftentimes are not understanding the implications of allowing their children to drive in certain circumstances. So I'll leave that for further discussion if it's appropriate.
Yes, Liz, I think it's very appropriate. I think we as commissioners have an advantage to bring the safety forum as it is our biggest event that we get to put on as a commission. And those of us that are involved in the commission have our own expertise and our own thoughts that we bring to the table. So hearing what you have, I think it's appropriate. And really what the forum does is it allows the commission to connect with the parents and community members on some of the pressing issues that we feel as a commission are important. So if we feel that driver safety is important, then it's certainly one of the topics that we can talk about. And I appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
And I think it's fair to say that, sorry, Ivy, did you want to?
No, I just had a suggestion, but you can finish it.
Awesome. So I think it's fair to say that we as a commission plan the safety forum, no one person plans it alone. So when we get down to it, we will be looking for subject matter experts for these ideas, and I think that's one of the collaborations that we have at our fingertips as a commission, that we know who's out there in the community who is an expert on these things that we feel our parents and community members at large should hear about. So be thinking about that as you're throwing out ideas as well. If you know somebody who is a great resource that wouldn't mind spending some time with us. Ivy.
I was going to suggest, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and everything, but I've had some discussions with some community members, especially parents and students, regarding like gun safety and how worrisome it is, especially with students being back in school, the threat of ongoing school shootings, and a lot of like miscommunication of how that's kind of being handled at each school. And I know in the past few weeks, especially at different high schools, we've had different instances with gun violence, and each of them have all been gone about in very different ways. And so I think if there's some community like information about how the process is usually gone about what they do with threats and when certain protocols are put in place.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea. Yes, Jessica.
I believe we did this last year, but I think the ongoing conversation about sex trafficking and exploitation is one that we can't talk about enough right now. So I think that would be wonderful to add again if possible.
Thank you. Amber, it looks like your hand is up.
Thank you. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
As I'm sitting here thinking about how we had done it in the past, I'm trying to figure out, it's a chicken and it's a chicken and the egg sort of issue, but where are we as far as a commission? We used to do like a brainstorming every year to try to figure out what items we could work on, what we were interested in working on, sort of where we fit in the district. And I know originally we did a lot of work on building safety for years, you know, helping with those, the contractors and those audits and sort of that situation. And then we also, but then this commission hasn't had a lot to do with, like, for example, the COVID pandemic. So as a commission, I'm just wondering, you know, do we have a vision for where we want to go? Have we done that work of figuring out what our priorities are? And then the reason I say it's a chicken or the egg is that maybe, you know, we hold these community forums. They've always been sort of a listening vision where we hear what the community is concerned about, and then we do maybe the brainstorming as a board about what we want to be working on based on what the community tells us. But it's kind of hard to have those listening forums without some direction or topics to begin with. But I'm just trying to figure out how this all fits with what we are doing as a commission.
And I think you raise a very excellent point, Commissioner Joyner. It's in years past we have dealt with building safety, and that sort of thing we've had those the consultants come out and present to us. I think during the pandemic there was some budgetary restrictions that kind of put that on the backside. So maybe we can bring up an item for a future agenda that we can talk about that sort of thing. And I think it's fair to ask what our vision is. And I think it's also fair to say it's no one person. There's 13 of us that sit on the commission, and we all should come together and have some ideas and thoughts. And I think the safety forum has always been that sounding board of what the direction of the Safe and Healthy Schools Commission should be. And I would not be opposed to going back to that.
Thank you. I'm just trying to think whether holding some sort of planning or brainstorming as a commission before we choose the topics for the forum would be a good idea. That's how it was done in the past. But then again, I mean, not necessarily. For me, I'm having trouble figuring out what the topics are because I don't know what we're doing as a commission. That's all. But thank you.
Thank you. And hearing that from you, I will certainly work with Dr. LaMarca and see what we can collaborate on, just so that we can get the chicken or the egg, whichever one comes first.
Thank you.
Any other ideas from the commission? So what I will say is I will ask for this to be an agenda item on every one of our agendas moving forward until the safety forum, just so we can continue to have that momentum and go forward with this. As history has it, our vice chair, Misty Von Allen, has led the last year's safety forum and really had some great community resources that she partnered with to take that on. So I don't want to necessarily delegate that task to her again, but if there's somebody else who would like to work on that, it doesn't have to be a single project. We can all work together, but I just want everybody to be thinking about who the community resources are that we're going to really use. And then we'll look at Commissioner Joyner's topic of brainstorming and planning, what the commission's priorities are, making sure that those are included in the safety forum. So I'm not looking for any action today. I just wanted to start the conversation so that it's in our forethought. We have essentially 4 meetings to plan this. And they come up fast. So with that, we'll close item 2.07. Not taking any action on that today, and brings us to our closing items. Item 3.01 is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
No.
Thank you. There's no public comment. With that, we will adjourn this meeting. Oh, no, I have 3.02. Our next meeting announcement is December 13th, 2021, here at the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees boardroom. And with that, I will call the meeting adjourned at 3:40.